Okay, now we're going to see MongoSluice in action. The first thing I'm going to demonstrate is connecting to a MongoDB collection and streaming its results directly into a series of SQL tables in MySQL. So first, let's look at the collection I'm going to be streaming from. Okay, so we're going to be using the BIOS database, and that actually has a collection also called BIOS. So if we do, and we're going to just filter just so we can take a look at one document. So, this is just one document in the collection, but this will give us an idea of what MongoSluice can do. So, what MongoSluice will do to this document is find the embedded objects and establish those as one-to-many relationships. So, at the top of the document, we have an ID. We have a name, but that's a object. So this is going to be decomposed into its core types, which in this case are, we have first and a last, those are both string. So this is going to be a table. Name will become a table, and it will have a one-to-one relationship with the BIOS table. We then have birth, which is already a simple type, which is a date. We have death, which is also a simple type, which is also a date. Then we have this field here called contribs. Contribs is an array. It is an array of contributions. This is a database of computer scientists, so these are contributions that this specific computer scientist has made. So this guy has Fortran, Algol, Backus, Form, and functional programming. So these will be exported as a one-to-many table with the BIOS. So this will be a series of strings that will exist in a table called contribs, and these will be in a one-to-many relationship with the root elements of the document. Now the next one we have here is called awards, and awards is also an array. And in this case, awards has subfields. So awards contains award, year, and by. So in this case, we're going to have another table called awards, and in that table we're going to have three columns: award, year, and by. So let's take a look at this in action. Okay, so in this case, we're running the MongoSluice jar, we're pushing to SQL from Nosql, and we're connecting to the BIOS database and the BIOS collection. So let's run this and take a look at the results in the SQL. So I'm going to be streaming this to a MySQL database, which I have here. This is just the default instance I've set up. There's already tables and views in here. But what we're going to see when we're done with the process is we're going to have new tables in here with new data types that came in from our input process. So I'm going to run the process. Okay. Now, let's look at the MySQL database. So this is done. So what this did is this actually went through each document in the BIOS collection, and then built a series of tables based on the data it found from the documents in the collection. So let's see what it did. Refresh this. Okay. So if I filter this, we have a BIOS table. Well, what's contained in the BIOS table? Well, we have a primary key, which was generated automatically. We saved the ID field, which came out of the Mongo document. We had one document, which contained a field called title, which is why all the rest are null. We have a death and a birth. We also have a second ID. So in this case, we had ID and we had two different types of data types for ID. We had one that was a number. We had one that was an object ID. So we preserved both of them in that case. Next, let's look at name. So in this case, it found the subdocument name and created a table with all the name data in it. So in this case, we had every name in every document streamed into a database. We've also got an AKA, which was found in a single document, and we've grabbed that too. So it's null for all the documents except for this one here where it was actually populated. So what this does is this will find every single data type in any name of any document that we found, and it will stream that data. And you'll notice it has a BIOS ID. This links it back in a one-to-one fashion with the BIOS table. So now let's look at contribs. So contribs, if you remember, was the contributions that that specific computer scientist made. And in this case, notice that we didn't have a field name associated with that. It was just an array that had values in it. So we have to give it a name. So in this case, MongoSluice defaults to field 1. In field 1, we have a BIOS ID which links it back to the main document set, BIOS ID, but also gives it a primary key. So in this case, it's smart enough to see that this is a one-to-many relationship. So we have a BIOS ID which links it back to BIOS. So we have a link back to here, and we have all the data. So in this case, it's simply a series of strings. Now let's look at awards. So awards is a little more complex because in awards we actually had data, we had field names inside the array. So again, BIOS ID links it back to the main BIOS table. We've also got a series of primary keys. So again, it was smart enough to see that this was a one-to-many relationship. So in this case, we have award, year, by. First, when you edit this, make sure that that second year doesn't show up. So in this case, we have award, year, and by. So again, it took the array and loaded it, created the table for it, created the metadata for it, and loaded all the data in from the document collection that we were just looking at. So let's look at the metadata real quick. Let's look at BIOS. So you'll notice also that all of the data types were preserved in the export process. We have death and birth, which were dates, and they remain dates in MySQL. We have title, which is a string field, so it's preserved as text. And we have two different ID types. We have one that's a native MongoDB ID, which we just save as text because it's basically a GUID. And we have double, which is the second type. So we had, in this case, both types. So we've mapped, basically, all of the data types that existed in the MongoDB database into the MySQL database. So let's look at name. Well, name has a link back to the BIOS document, main documents table. Then we have last person, AKA. all, in this case, strings. Now let's look at contribs. Contribs, same thing. We have a BIOS ID linking it back. We have a PK because it's a one-to-many relationship. And we have field 1 because we couldn't find a field to extract, but we needed to give it a name, so field 1 becomes the default for that. And lastly, for awards, we have award, year, and buy. So in this case, we have award, year, and buy. We have award and buy being text, and we have year being double. So in this case, same thing. We've got all of our data moved over. We've got the data types correct, and we've got all of the data inside of it. So that's an example of moving data from a MongoDB collection to a MySQL database. Next, I'm going to show you how to move data from a MySQL database into a Mongo database, which is a much more straightforward process.